Good afternoon. Welcome to the May 20th Planning Commission meeting. We'll call the meeting to order, and we have a quorum present. So we will go. The first item is old business, and the first item on old business is Racetrack site plan for 16,371 square feet, gas station convenience market on 2.8 acres zone commercial highway located along Northwest Broad Street and Thompson Lane. Racetrack Petroleum is the developer. Margaret Ann, I think you got that one. Hello.
I do.
Good to see you in person.
Good afternoon. Thank you. It's good to be seen. Our first item of old business, we do have two items, is for Racetrack. It was originally considered during your March 18th meeting this year, and you deferred action to get some more information. And just as background, it is for a convenience sales and service gasoline station that's on just a little less than 3 acres. It is located along the Stones River, so it does have a portion of the floodway on one side, and the greenway is adjacent to this property as well. It's at the intersection of Northwest Broad Street and North Thompson Lane. Of course, Broad Street is a state highway and would be required to get TDOT approval after receiving approval from this body if they were to move forward. There was a plan approved for Racetrack last year, so they have a plan approved for this property. Since that time, they looked at acquiring a oddly shaped adjacent parcel located between their property and the river, and have a contract to purchase that property. That increased the size of their property, so then they wanted to reevaluate their plan that has been approved for the site, and noticed that they could add an additional service, which is for diesel service to the north or the rear of the property. So they presented a new plan with the additional parcel to the east between the original tract and the river, and then added that additional service. There were several questions at the meeting, mostly regarding, I think, access and circulation. The building is what has been approved before, and I think they've worked out a design that meets our standards. The landscaping and parking all do meet our minimum standards, but there was a request to defer the item, and some of the questions I heard were to look at signage that could be discouraged, that could discourage large trucks on the site, possibly looking at right turn onto North Thompson Lane due to the proximity of Northwest Broad Street, make sure there's enough land to provide future right-of-way for the possibility of the bridge to be constructed over Broad Street, which we anticipate to be done at some point in the future, although not the near future. And so I think that we've been able to adequately confirm that the right-of-way that we have is in existence, so we don't need additional right-of-way. Since that time, I think our planning director has been meeting with members of our public infrastructure department, previously Public Works, and I always have to pause before I say that because the name has recently changed, Public Infrastructure, and so they maintain all of our roads. And Mr. Ram Balachandra has looked into the item and has provided some analysis, which was included in my staff report as well. There's an image, and I don't know, Matthew, if you can pull up the one that looks like this on the second page.
The aerial? This one?
Next. Well, actually, you're there, yeah. He was showing the different access points, and he said that for further information regarding the site, generally, time of day, prohibitions. I don't see Ram here, right? Oh, he is here. Oh, I'd asked him to come, but I didn't see him, sorry. Do you want to speak to it, Mr. Balachandra? Okay. I'd asked him to come to today's meeting last minute. I'm glad that he showed up because, of course, this is something he understands fully. But according to Mr. Balachandra, generally, time of day prohibitions and restrictions are not very effective and create other unintended problems. If full access on Thompson Lane from the Racetrack site is not allowed, motorists will not be able to get back to Broad Street heading southeast without making illegal U-turns or left turns. I think that's what the illustration is showing you. There are no other cross streets close by that connect back to Broad Street. During the Planning Commission's meeting, there was some discussion about making it right in, right out entrance, similar to the existing BP across the street. That BP is a little different because there's full access just north of the right in, right out, and I think that's something that we missed during the discussion, is actually it has 2 points, and that northernmost arrow shows that. If the full access was not granted when approved several years ago, motorists would be facing a similar situation. Traffic from the BP site will not be able to head northeast on Thompson Lane. So I think our analysis was that it should be full access. We did ask Racetrack to look at adding a cross access to the parcel to the north, so the parcel that faces Thompson Lane, and they approached the property owners. The property owners were not interested in allowing a full access, but we asked them to design the site so that that would be something that could be accommodated in the future. And Mr. Blomley, there is the first site plan that's in the staff comments is a revised site plan that shows a turnout to the north and the most likely location for there to be one, so that they could be set up in the future to have that cross access when I expect the property to the north will redevelop at some point, but I certainly can't give time frame for that. So Mr. Matt Taylor is representing the applicant. I'm going to ask him to come to the lectern and probably can provide you much more detailed information, but I did kind of want to give you that overview. If you have any questions from staff, we're here as well.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Ms. Green did a good job summarizing the steps we've taken over the past, I guess, 6 to 8 weeks. Is that we met with staff immediately after the meeting. Staff asked us to, one, approach the neighbor to the north, which we did, and also asked us to grant access across our site for them, which was a good idea. I really hadn't thought about that, but it would give the opportunity for the properties to the north to cross our traffic, across our site to get back to Broad Street instead of having to cross Thompson. And so we're happy to accommodate that. We've also kind of provided a scenario where when that does develop in the north, we've got access back to Thompson that would align with the BP's full access to the north as well. So I'll be happy to answer any questions. I've got hard copies of that revised site plan if you'd like to see it in person. If not, I'm sure the screen does an adequate job.
Any questions for Matt? All right. Thanks, Matt. All right. Planning Commission members, any discussion or questions for staff or comments?
I would just like to clarify, this whole future access point with the adjacent property is all, nothing's guaranteed there. It's hypothetical, correct?
Correct.
Yes, ma'am. If you're looking at the green diagram, that is hypothetical. It could take any number of routes through that future site. But I think the city's been very consistent in requiring cross-connectivity in newer developments. And so I feel certain that some kind of connectivity in that location would happen at some point in the future.
But it would all be pending coordination and agreement from that property owner.
So obviously this body, just like we're talking today, can require that from that property owner when they redevelop. And now we're already doing our part with our plan. And so there would not be, we wouldn't necessarily have to be a party to that. We're stubbing out, we're going to grant mutual cross access. So it's purely comes with a site plan approval for that property.
So this stub out location, is it variable?
It is, yes. We worked with staff because we felt like that was the best location, but as long as it's not interfering with our canopies, we would be very flexible if it worked better at a different location for those uses. We would just ask that they construct that. We don't want to have to come back and do that. But working with staff, we felt like that would, one, be a reminder if the same personnel, same body is not here whenever that's redeveloped, this would serve as a reminder and as kind of a key indicator that, hey, something's supposed to happen here whenever staff starts looking at redevelopment.
Matt, I just want to say thank you for putting forth the effort that you did. I know that there are concerns and no doubt I still have concerns with it, but I think you've put forward a good faith effort to try and help resolve the issue. I don't think there's any question that many of us feel that within the next 10 years or so there'll probably be a bridge over that roadway, and that will add a whole new dimension of concerns for this property when you add a access road down the side of it, kind of like we experienced with Broad Street. But I really don't know how you plan for something that may or may not happen 10 years from now. And so I think that, I think you've put forth a good effort. I can't say that I love it, but I think that, sometimes you just got to do the best you can with the situation that you presented. And I think this is a unique situation, and it presents unique challenges to try and accomplish what you're trying to do.
Well, we appreciate that. Racetrack worked very hard and diligently, made some good efforts to try to get that access to the north. And, you just can't control everybody else's property, but we look forward to the new location and would appreciate the vote of support today.
I'll make a comment. I had some hesitation when we saw this the second time, but Mr. Balachandra, I'm assuming, based upon your presence and the comments that Margaret Ann made, that staff is okay with and actually wants the full access as to where it is on this property with respect going on to Thompson Lane. Okay. Any other questions or comments or motions?
If there are none, I'll make a motion that we approve subject to all staff comments.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That passes, Matt. Moving on to the second item of old business. Tommy Car Wash, site plan for a 5,200 square feet vehicle wash on .99 acres zone commercial highway located along Memorial Boulevard. Tommy Car Wash Systems developer. Margaret Ann.
Thank you. Our second item of old business is from the very same March meeting this year, the March 18th meeting. You considered an item for a Tommy Car Wash on Memorial Boulevard and deferred action based on obtaining some additional information. And at that meeting, we described to you that there's a 5,200 square foot automated vehicle wash with some accessory structures proposed here. This site was the previous location of a car wash. It was a self-service car wash, which I think probably was more popular in the 90s. And so they're proposing to do a different approach. During the Planning Commission meeting, there were questions about our stormwater regulations, and car washes have a substantial impact on our stormwater ability to serve the area they take up. It can be anywhere from 20 to 60 single-family equivalents. But this site was previously a car wash, so it would be, after speaking to our Water and Sewer Department Director, he's comfortable with a car wash being located here, but just in the future, when we bring you maybe car washes in the future, we'll have some different kind of conversation if it's a green field and there hasn't been anything there yet. But I think the majority of the conversation at our March meeting was regarding the design, the architecture of the proposed car wash on this site. It did not and still does not meet our design guidelines. But at the March 18th meeting, they requested a blank exemption from the architectural standards and the design guidelines. I think that was an approach that we weren't comfortable with, and we really wanted them to come back and see what changes they could do to come more into compliance, but then also specifically request those exceptions that they want. So rather than just saying we don't want to comply at all, come back to you and say, we've been able to change these items, and this is where we would still like to request an exemption. So I spent quite a bit of time on Zoom with them, giving them options and opportunities for changes in the building that could help steer it more in the direction of our design guidelines. And so what we're going to do today is I'm going to allow the architect who's in Michigan to talk to you on the phone, so they're not here in person. I think maybe just safer protocols and not traveling was what was important at this time. So in just a moment, I'm going to ask them to go through specifically the changes that have been made and the exemptions that they're requesting so that you can make an informed decision today. If you have any questions, of course, I'll be glad to answer them. Otherwise, I guess the cable department, they'll open the phone.
And we'll put their PDF presentation on the screen
Yeah,
momentarily.
that's what I was about to ask. Okay, thank you.
Stephen, Blake, you guys are on?
Okay. Hi, good afternoon to the Planning Commission members and to all those present. I want to say thank you for allowing us to be part of this meeting remote today in the circumstance that we're facing with the COVID-19. So as we get started, as Margaret Ann indicated, we went back and did some revisions to the design of the building, and I'd like to go through those with you right now. On the screen should be sheet A201, which is basically our architectural interior elevations. The first change that we made to comply with the design guide was we eliminated the CMU base that went around the base of the building, and we replaced that with a brick indicated as M1 on our drawing with a similar color charcoal to comply with the design guide item C under materials. The second item that we revised on the exterior elevation, this applies to all 4 elevations. We eliminated the corrugated metal panel banding at the towers A and B and dry back room, along with the 8-inch high black metal accent bands above and below that corrugated metal panel band. We replaced that with a brick, which is noted as M3 on our drawing. It's going to be the color urban gray for a wide band, and then we added an 8-inch high brick solar source above and below the brick band noted as M3 to emulate the 8-inch metal band removed with the M1 brick color charcoal, and that would comply with the design guide item G on material. The third item is we added brick recess feature to comply with the void requirement in the design guide item F for transparency and articulation and expression to elevation at the exit, the entry, and the front elevation. Those are labeled 2, 3, and 4 on sheet A201 that you're viewing right now. The fourth item that we revised is we added a brick base feature to the elevations at the exit end and the entry end, labeled 2 and 3 on the submitted drawing. And we meet the 24-inch minimum requirement there, and then this meets the design guide item F, transparency, articulation, and expression. The item 5, we ended up stepping the fascia gutter element that is located and shows on the front and back elevation, which would be the one labeled 1 and 4 on the submitted drawing to comply with the design guide for item D, building mass, scale, and proportion. So those were the revisions that we went back to the drawing board and made to the design of the building to better comply the design guide lines for Murfreesboro, Tennessee.
Stephen, this is Matthew. Do you need us to scroll through the rest of the sheets? We're just still on the first sheet of your presentation.
Let's look at the first sheet of the presentation. So the one area that we would request an exception from the Planning Commission on would be the requirement for the minimum of the base of the building to be at 24 inches. We comply with a large amount on all 4 elevations, including the exit elevation that does front Memorial Boulevard as a primary elevation. We have a few small locations along the back elevation and the front elevation at the wash tunnel where that knee wall is at 1 foot 6 inches high. So we're just 6 inches shy of that requirement, but we would ask for an exception there because if we have to raise that wall, it would require us to resize all of the structure of the building that's been fabricated for the site. But then we feel like as we went through the site plan approval process and Steve Steele has presented to you that there is going to be landscape according to the landscape plan. So if you could please switch to slide number 3 for me, please.
Done.
Okay, so looking at the site plan there's a fair amount of landscape material being placed along those short walls that I'm referring to. So eventually you wouldn't really have those walls visible to the front or the rear side once the vegetation has taken root and continues to grow. That is the one exception we're asking for there. And then the other exception that we're asking for is in regards to the 35% transparency rule, and that would be affecting the exit and entry end of the car wash tunnel. Let me go to, and that would be going back to, if you could please flip back to the original first slide for me.
Done.
Thank you. So referencing elevation number 2 and elevation number 3, we've added the masonry base, as I mentioned in our additions, but we're just a tad over the percentage amount allowed for the transparency there. But we did also add the void that you see, which is in the brick recesses in both elevation 2 and 3, to help us meet that requirement. Our current percentage is bear with me a second, please. Okay, so we have included the void calculations for each elevation in the table called building proportion calculation void. We do not meet the 35% guide minimum on all 4 elevations. The front elevation calculates to 36%, which complies. The entry elevation calculates to 18%, and then the exit elevation calculates to 17%. The back elevation does calculate to 41%. So we comply on 2 of the 4 elevations, so we are requesting an exception for that.
Stephen, did you have anything else to add, or do you need to go through any of the additional slides that you have in there?
At this point, I guess I would open the floor to comments or questions and answers.
So this is Ken Halliburton. Maybe you can address my question too, Margaret Ann, in case. So it sounds like that we've narrowed this down to 2 exceptions. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's right, they've identified 2 exceptions that I'd like to ask. On the sides is that clear, like cloudy, it's more like a cloudy plastic, and it's, I think, where you can see through. There is a brick base requirement, and it's 24 inches in our design guidelines, and they're asking to do less than that. I don't recall what they said they were doing, but where that clear or that cloudy plexiglass material is, they want to do a smaller base, while saying that they're having the 24 inches on the front, which is oriented toward Memorial Boulevard, and on the rear, but they're wanting an exception where that, I guess it's a tunnel, maybe where
Right.
the tunnel element is. And they're asking for an exception on our design guidelines for commercial and office require a 35% void area. Retail is 50%. So basically that you're adding some breaks and elevations, not having this just a flat wall. And so they're not quite at 35 feet in some area, 35% in some areas, and so they're asking for an exception for that as well.
And that he mentioned transparency rule. Is that what you're speaking of?
He said transparency, but that's not what it is. It's void. It's the void calculations, and there's a 35% minimum. And so sometimes that's achieved with glass. And so I think that's probably why he said transparency, because if you have windows, then
I see.
I think it's just a term maybe that he just used, but he means the void calculations.
That's correct, Margaret.
Margaret Ann.
I'm sorry. Sorry, me. Margaret Ann. Thank you.
Other questions from the Planning Commission? Go ahead, Ronnie.
How do these exceptions that we're contemplating making from the design guidelines on this site differ from the original site? Are we doing the same? Are we being consistent? Are we being inconsistent? And
The original site does not comply with the design guidelines. It's even more out of compliance than this is. So the original site I mean, we went back and read the minutes and made sure everybody was remembering everything, does not comply with the design guidelines. It was never said that it complied with the design guidelines. I think we were thinking that it was a transition time and people needed time to adjust to change or the new normal. So this one, they've at least made changes the second time, removing the corrugated metal, replacing the block with brick to increase their percentages of brick, stone, or rock. And I think they've done something else. So they've done some changes to the building with this rendition where they didn't do that with the previous one. I mean, they improved it from like their standard design, but that's pretty typical.
One thing just important to me, I think part of the difficulty with this is we have two different sites. We have the same franchise in two different buildings here. I do think whatever we do, we look forward to the third option so we don't find ourselves here again. I mean, because we could find ourselves here again. Just a comment.
Certainly.
I agree. I mean, I think once we set their plan on this, that we don't come back and say the next door. Okay. I think once we set their plan on this design, that we don't come back and say, hey, you got to change the design to be even more. I mean, as a franchise, they need to be able to replicate. So that's the thing. I think if we agree upon this, then we need to allow them to replicate across the city if they so desire to do that.
I will say that that's not, if they want to do a design that doesn't meet design guidelines in the future, they have to come to this body and ask you for that permission. It may be you all, or it may be somebody else in 5 or 10 years.
Yeah.
So you can't just exempt any future. We'll have to do the same thing again, but I hope they at least have a better understanding of what expectations on either side. And but we can't take that, I mean,
No, I understand.
know of a way to do that.
I understand.
Yeah, I don't think there's any scenario that can adapt every change that we ever approve to the guidelines. I mean, I think that's asking too much for the planning department, as well as trying to define so many of the things that we discussed, whether it's the base or whether it's the transparency or the void area but I do think every situation is unique, and that's why we have a planning commission, I think, to decide whether or not it's appropriate. And I appreciate the developer going back and looking at the project a second time, because I think there are significant improvements on this. Is it my understanding that there was a pretty good relationship and a pretty good rapport between the developer and the planning commission or the planning department? I mean, were we much more successful this time? Because last time I left with the feeling that there was not a whole lot of communication and a whole lot of effort put forth to meet what the city's planning department was asking for. Do you feel, Margaret Ann, that this time they did put forth a just effort with the understanding that they are a franchise and they do have small idiosyncrasies that make them unique, but do you feel personally that they made a good faith effort to comply with what we asked them to do?
I appreciate that after the planning commission meeting, they actually had the architect reach out to me. I hadn't been able to have that conversation in the past, so that's generally where I start, but I think that helped us move forward because they can come up with good ideas. And when I can say, this is what we're designing to and this is why it's important, generally architects have a good way of saying, okay, I see that's important to you, this is how I can get there.
Right.
And sometimes it's difficult conversations to have with other professions or maybe owners because, they're business managers. They're not so much thinking of architecture. So I appreciated that, to have that conversation with the architect.
But the process did improve.
It did improve, yes.
The comment I will make, it sounds like we've gone from a blanket, we don't want to do anything, or not anything, we don't want to do the majority of things that are in guidelines down to 2. Mm-hmm. And they have worked with staff, specifically you. On the 2 items, one I'll speak to both of them. The 24-inch base, I would be, I think it's good that at the front of the building's got the base. The fact that maybe the sides don't have the 24-inch base, that doesn't give me a whole lot of heartburn, especially with the landscaping piece that they showed in their presentation. As long as the vegetation grows and it's there over time, I think we're going to be fine there. I'm a little lost on this void rule. All you're saying is the breaks, the architecture of the building, the side of, specifically probably the sides, are just one linear side and there's no breaks. Is that the issue at hand?
So if you think about like a Dollar General, if you look at the front, they have windows and awnings, and those windows and doors are voids. But Dollar General doesn't like to put windows in the back of their building because they have warehouse and coolers that line it, and so it doesn't make sense. So in those scenarios, what we have done in the past is we required spandrel glass, so fake glass with awnings, and we count those as voids. Or we've had them push the brick in and do
Yes.
patterns and add. We've been liberal with interpretation of void, I think, just because we want to help creativity and help people meet the goal, but where they've done maybe the insets with the awnings, so they're adding things to that wall. We do have a requirement that every 40 feet that the building has to be broken, and it has to be taller than it is wide, which kind of helps with breaking up as well. But the void helps your solid mass, break up that solid mass wall, and I don't know, Jennifer, if you can help me a little bit better explain it, but really what it is trying to like add some shadow lines and dimensions and interest and detail, and that's a way of managing that goal.
Okay, thank you.
You did a good job, Margaret Ann. So if they were to increase that percentage, in the color elevation where the flag pole is right there, you say added more of the spandrel glass windows where you can't actually see through it, that would help them get to that. I'm assuming here they don't count the red material in their percentage because it's not, or do they? So the red element is breaking up their elevation in this situation, which would be a way to do that, but they can't truly calculate it in their percentage. I think they've done a good job here. I don't look at this and see voids, and so again, it is an exception to the rule. I'll say in general, I think they brought back a tremendous amount of changes based on the requirements, more than I even expected to see, which I think they did a good job at. I think the red meets the need in my mind to say that they've left us with an interesting elevation, and therefore I don't have a problem with the way they've addressed that request, and I'm okay with it.
I'll make a comment. I'd just like to thank the applicant for working with planning and staff to get together on this. Looks like a great project. I personally don't see any issues with the base or the void space. I think it's going to be a terrific complement to that area of town, and look forward to see the project move forward.
I couldn't agree with you more, Chase. I think it'll be a real asset to that community, and will be a real benefit to the people in that area who have a dirty car. And but when I look at the design of this project, I don't see those massive solid walls that I think the intent is there. There's really, I think oftentimes when we look at structures from not just the use of the current use, but what would it look like if somebody else were to move into this building and use it. And in this particular case, I don't think that applies, because I think this building will always be a car wash unless it's designed or torn down and restructured as a different type building. So I don't think that it's quite the same because of the uniqueness of the usage of it. And unless there's anybody else with comments, I'll move for approval.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any other comments?
Only one. I do live in the area, and I do like the design. I appreciate everything you guys have done. And I think this will be a huge, huge compliment to our area. Thank you.
May I just interject one thing just for a point of clarification on the motion? Mr. Smotherman, on your motion, I think Mr. Ives, correct me if I'm wrong, but it would probably be good to make explicit in the motion that it includes approving the exceptions from the design guidelines that have been requested, and then also that it would be subject to all staff comments.
And I will amend my motion to reflect what Matthew just said.
Good, thank you.
And I will second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes. So moving on to consent agenda. We'll read through these. Item A, Valley Farm Section 2 preliminary plat for 32 lots on 6.52 acres zone PUD in unincorporated Rutherford County. and served as an outside the city sewer customer located along Red Barn Road and Pinion Street, Valley Farms Group, LLC developer. West Wind Reserve, Section 2, preliminary plat for 45 lots on 10.6 acres, zoned RS6, located east of Armstrong Valley Road. Cornerstone Development is the developer. American Plumbing, final plat for 1 lot on 5.78 acres, zoned H1, located along South Malloy Lane. Joseph Miller is the developer. Harrison and Black, lot 214, final plat for 1 lot on 0.47 acres, zoned RM16, located along Fairview Avenue. Kurt and Rosemary Bloom developers. Harrison and Black re-subdivision of lots 158 and 159, final plat for 1 lot on 0.7 acres, zoned RM16, located along Crestline Avenue south of Division Street. Eric Bloom developer. Parks and Holden addition re-subdivision of lot 41, final plat for 1 lot on 0.17 acres, zoned RM16, located along East Street. Kurt and Rosemary Bloom developers. Shelton Square Common Area amenity lot, final plat for 1 lot on 7.35 acres, zone PRD, located along Blackman Road and Shelton Boulevard. Shelton Square LLC is the developer. Liberty Valley, Section 7, final plat for 24 lots on 8.18 acres, zone PRD, located along General Yeager Drive. Liberty Heights LLC is the developer. Brickway, re-subdivision of lot 11, final plat for 2 lots on 2.84 acres, zone RS15, located along Pitts Lane. Peggy Moore is a developer. Buchanan Estates, Section 8, Phase 1, final plat for 51 lots on 33.63 acres, zoned RM in the unincorporated county and served as an outside of the city sewer customer, located along Duesenberg Drive and Volta Road. Jones Construction is the developer. Warrior Drive self-storage phases 1 and 2, site plan for 41,900 square feet storage facility on 4.6 acres, zone commercial highway, located along Warrior Drive south of New Salem Highway. Stewart Conway developer. Anyone on the Planning Commission or anyone in the audience would like to have any of these removed from the consent agenda and talked about? Seeing none, do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So move.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, moving on to plats and plans. The first item is Greenway Estates preliminary plat for 24 lots on 12.7 acres, zoned RS10, located along Cason Trail east of Stony Meadow Drive. Blue Sky Construction developer. Mr. Ware.
Yes, sir. These 24 lots are for 65 wide lots. They're 10,000 square feet in size. You see from the site plan, preliminary plat, there's a mail kiosk proposed off of Cason Trail. There's a 6-foot privacy fence proposed between the mail kiosk and lot 1. And I can yield for any questions the Planning Commission have, or and also the applicant is here for any questions.
And Planning Commission, I would add that this is the plan for the preliminary plat for the single-family development that's located directly to the south of Cason Trail, south of Hidden River Estates, that will be developed and provide that connection back to the World Outreach Church property in advance of Hidden River Estates being developed. So this is the awaited plat that provides that connection that Mr. Burns committed to providing in the Hidden River Estates PRD pattern book.
So, Brian, which comes first? Would this development come first to have the access to Hidden Rivers, or not necessarily would it be that way?
No, I can't do Hidden Rivers per agreement until I put this road in and do this.
Okay.
So while the church is probably developing the other side of the street, we'll probably be building these homes, and hopefully the church will be done, then we'll start Hidden Rivers.
Okay.
That's the game plan.
Thanks, Brian. Any other questions from the Planning Commission?
These lots are significantly larger than the lots that they back up to, aren't they?
Yes, sir, they are. They're fairly large.
Other questions, comments, motions?
Move for approval.
Second.
I have a motion and second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That passes. The next item is Pinnacle Bank site plan for temporary drive-through facility and demolition of an existing 44,055 square foot building on 1.08 acres zone CBD located at the northeast corner of North Maple Street and West College Street. Pinnacle Financial developer, or is the developer. I will conduct the meeting, but being Pinnacle is my employer, I will not vote. I'll abstain from voting or any comment on the application.
Chairman Halliburton, Pinnacle is my employer as well, so I will be abstaining from the vote.
Ms. Kerr, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Halliburton and Planning Commission members. This site is for review of the Pinnacle Financial Partners Bank for a temporary drive-through facility and demolition of a 44,055 square foot, 5-story existing building. The proposed property is CBD with the overlay zone of City Core overlay and consists of one lot located at 114 West College Street. The site is 1.8 acres. It has two access locations, one on West College and one on North Maple Street. The development will be completed in 2 phases. Phase 1 will be the construction for access circulation for 3 drive-through lanes and the placement of one 820 square foot drive-through portable building. And then the second phase will be the demolition of the existing 5-story structure. The temporary building does not meet the city architectural design guidelines and would require exemptions to be approved by the Planning Commission for the building's composition, rhythm, transparency, articulation, and expression in materials. Again, this is just a portable temporary building that would be placed on the lot for drive-through service and while they are in construction of their new facility that is to come at a later date. The applicant is available to answer any questions, as I will be available as well.
Any questions for Ms. Kerr?
Matthew, do you want to pull up that sheet that shows?
It's pulled up. It's just not. There we go.
Okay.
There we go. And
That is actually what type of facility they're requesting to put on the site while they are constructing.
And to give you an idea, the time frame with which they're working, we already have received this month, when we had a submittal deadline last Thursday, the 14th. We have received the site plan for the permanent building. So this is truly a temporary building. They just want to get this in place so that they can continue operations while they're building their permanent building. And I think they can probably go over more their timeline as far as when they hope to, or how long they would have the temporary building in place. But they are moving forward with the permanent building. So this is not anticipated to be a long-term solution, just an interim solution.
Do you know what the general guidance is on the timeline?
I believe Mr. Huddleston and his client are here if one of them would like to address that.
Yes, sir. Hey, good afternoon. Thank you for having us here. 18-month timeline on construction from demo to final construction is what we anticipate right now.
If you could state your name, please.
Neil Parrish, Hastings Architecture.
Thank you, Neil.
Thank you.
Neil, I'm assuming you've got a good idea of what you're going to build in place of the building that's demolished. Is that a word, demolished? Demolished. Thank you. There you go. And what type what's changing about the structure that's going in to replace the structure that's currently there? Is it going to be a taller building, a larger footprint wise? What's taking place?
No, sir. The existing building is just really reached the end of its functional life right now. So Pinnacle's needs have shifted a little. So we're building a 2-story structure, approximately 12,000 square feet. And as Mr. Blomley mentioned, we've submitted that already for next month's commission review. Okay. It's a masonry building, has a different look, more in keeping with Pinnacle's current and the downtown's current design standards than the existing building does. But that's what will be taking its place ultimately.
Other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other comments, questions, or motions with respect to this application?
I will move for approval, subject to all staff comments.
I'll second.
Exemptions too.
And I think the motion should state that because it's a temporary building, it is exempt from the architectural requirements of the design guidelines.
And I will accept that amendment.
And I'll second that amendment.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. 2 abstentions. Passes, folks.
Can I just say that I like, as a staff member, being able to interject amendments to motions of the planning commission? I'm just kidding.
All right, item C, 840 Storage Solutions, site plan for 32,130 square feet, self-service storage facility on 8.2 acres zone PUD located along Florence Road and Santana Street. The Downs Group LLC is the developer. Margaret Ann.
Thank you. This next item is for you to consider phase 1 of a plan for new self-service storage facility located right in the nook of 840 Florence Road and Interstate 24. You can see on the map that it's the area outlined in blue just to the north of 840. This property is zoned PUD, Plan Unit District, and was zoned such in 2003 as the Florence Point, a part of the Florence Point development, which also includes some of the townhomes and single family around this area. It called for a commercial node here and specifically allowed self-storage facilities. It's on your regular agenda because I wanted to point out to you that the planned development zoning does permit this use. We have amended our zoning ordinance to not allow these types of uses within 300 feet of major intersections. So if this were bulk zone, then it would not be a permitted use, but because it's a planned development that received approval in 2003, it is allowed. And so just if you got questions or you wanted to know why our department was approving a plan there, it's because the planned development book says that it can be located there. It did need to work on the layout design of the site and the building because they do need to meet our design guidelines, which of course weren't, to your point, weren't even thought of in 2003, and here in 2020 we find them very valuable. We have worked with them for several months, going through different variations and renditions of a very typical one-story self-storage facility. I know that as a body, I think you've almost exclusively seen the multi-level self-storage. That seems to be what is being built now, and usually 3 to 4 stories at least. And this is more a traditional design, so a single story. So they struggled a bit finding ways to meet our design guidelines, but I think ultimately got there. When you look at the architecture, I hope that you think the same thing as well. They also were able to accommodate the site design standards for landscaping, screening, buffering, and formal open space. Some of our comments have been this site, how it's viewed from the interstates, which are highly visible, wanting to make sure that there's enough landscaping to screen the use here, because this is something that we don't like to be a front door to Murfreesboro. This is usually something that's a little bit more of an interior use, and so many of our comments speak to that and ask how that is being proposed. This phase 1 is only what you see on the screen before you. They do own the remainder of the property that cradles 840, but are only proposing to develop the part that has frontage on Santana. Also proposing to create commercial outparcels along Florence Road, so you'll probably see something there come to you in the future for a use and hopefully will help screen this type of uses. The representatives of the applicant are here, and I'll invite them to the lectern to introduce themselves and the project. They have a board for you to look at. If you have any questions, they'll be glad to answer them. For staff, we'll be happy to answer them as well. If you do approve this plan, we ask that you do it subject to all staff comments. Do you have anything for me before the design team come forward?
My name is Dickie Sullivan with Sullivan Engineering. I'm the site engineer on the project. Paul Bass is the architect. He's here today. So we're here to answer any of your questions that you may have.
Well, I don't know that this has any bearing. It's just a curiosity question. From 840, are you going to be looking down on this project at all, or is it going to be pretty much at the same site level as 840?
We're next to 24.
Okay.
And it's pretty close to the same elevation. It may be a little bit higher.
Okay.
But it's not a lot of difference right there.
Okay.
It's at the Florence Road overpass.
Right.
We're just to the right of that.
Okay. Any other questions?
Can we zoom the aerial in? There. So how much of the site is, or it's fronting Santana? Or Florence Road?
The distance wise?
Well, I'm trying to see how much of the site you're really going to see from 24 and 840.
You have the ramp between you and the interstate. You'll see that the boundary line along the ramp.
The ramp heading towards Nashville from 840 getting onto I-24.
Yeah.
Yes. So from 840, you're really not going to see the site, but you'll see it right at that ramp is where you'll see it from. In this first phase, it'd be really hard to see it. It's up in the north corner up there. So the second phase would be back down below, and we'll screen when that phase starts too. We're also screening this phase from the interstate. That screening may move back later on, but it's being screened now from all directions.
So, Margaret Ann, what type of buffer and how much screening are we talking? I mean, my only heartburn is this is a gateway to the city.
It is, and
I just want to make sure that
I might kind of look at Brad Barbie and see if he remembers. My first suggestion was to design it so the buildings kind of protect the view into the site, and you have the back of the buildings that you can treat architecturally and keep you from being able to see in the site. They weren't interested in, Brad, if you don't mind, come up here. They were interested in using landscaping to screen it, and so Brad and I have talked, and I just don't remember the details.
They're calling it a Type D a Type D backing up to the Florence Point subdivision along the.
Right, that'd be the eastern property line?
Along the eastern property line.
Okay, yeah, there's a Type E buffer against the single-family dwellings to the east.
D.
Or D? Mm-hmm. Yeah, D. And then on the southern edge of this phase one, I believe there's a single row of trees that have been placed right about where you had your cursor, Matthew. And that's intended to be planted with this first phase to help screen the bay doors and the roll-up doors on the back sides of those buildings from the view shed of the ramp and 840 and 24 as much as possible at this point. I believe that's what he was referencing, that row of trees will probably go away when the future phases are developed, and screening will be moved back more to the edge of the property as it becomes more fully developed.
So for me, I'm more interested in probably the final phase, and what is your thoughts on the screening if they develop it full out? Are we going to be screening the property, or are we just going to be able to see a storage facility?
It's my understanding that this is going to be a typical one-story kind of mini storage development with roll-up doors that would be visible. If those doors are visible from a public right-of-way, they would need to be screened. So in my opinion, we would be asking for screening along the property lines to block that view shed into the property. I haven't seen anything future. Have you seen future phase drawings?
There's a sheet in there back, there's a build out in the plans.
The approvals today aren't for any future phases.
Oh, I
It would
understand.
not be atypical for you to require additional screening for self-storage facilities, especially with this visibility. The zoning ordinance specifically says that when you, for the planning commission to review the buffers and the screening of these type facilities. And so I think it wouldn't be atypical to require additional screening. Landscaping and buffering is good, distance is the best. But there are years of maturation, it takes time for them to grow. If they die, there could be a gap in that. And so there could be additional treatments like berms, walls. I'm trying to think of other types of screening that they could do that would be appropriate if you wanted them now. I don't generally love the idea of putting landscaping in with an idea that you're going to be taking out in the future, because I like that time that I hate losing that time that they've grown. And so usually my suggestion is to go ahead and put a buffer in, and so it gives it more time to grow and mature, and you're not taking that out to put something in the future. I think they specifically wanted to do that in this case, to have it located in a future phase that would require it being removed. But just as a general rule, I prefer not to spend time and money putting something in and then knowing you're going to have to rip it out, when you could put it to the edge of the property and maybe give it, if the other phase doesn't develop for 5 years, that material has had 5 years to grow, and so it's more effective as a screen.
Back to your point, Margaret Ann, though, I'm assuming the applicant really doesn't want to do that, because would we require them to put that landscaping up a much greater area?
So it could be a greater area, but we require all buffers to be maintained in perpetuity, which is different than general landscaping. General landscaping, after the bond expires, can die, and we don't have a lot of say saying replant your island trees.
Right.
But buffers, we changed that. Oh, good. But buffers are required to be maintained in perpetuity and irrigated. So I think the reason they're trying to keep it closer to the site is because they'd have to run an underground automated irrigation system to the perimeter of the property, which they will have to do eventually, but they're trying to postpone that.
Sure.
That's the main reason. Irrigation.
Okay.
All right. Other questions, or anyone else from the applicant that's wanting to speak to this project?
Architects here, if you have any questions.
If there's any building-related questions, Paul Bass,
Any questions regarding the architecture? All right.
I think there's probably always challenges when you're asking for areas to be bermed and irrigated and stuff that really doesn't have to do with the project. And I know we've run into that in the past with some other projects that we somehow seem to be able to work around those. But the project itself currently shows two types of fencing in the booklet there, aluminum fencing and vinyl fencing. Where would the vinyl be used, and where would the aluminum fencing be used on the parameter of the property that we're seeing?
The solid screening is being used between the residential units, and it'd be landscaped
On the outside? Right.
The aluminum stone column fencing will be in the front. And it's just to accent the.
Is it just across the front of the property
just
only?
across the front. Then the whole side will be, fenced in too, so. But we have a decorative fence in the front.
So what kind of fencing are you talking about on the side? Would that be chain link or?
Yeah, it'd be security type fencing. It's to be standard what you see around storage facilities.
questions? So, I mean, I think there's somewhat hesitation over this whole fence thing. I'm taking it. So we get where the aluminum fence is going to be up front. Is a chain link fence then all the way around it, and even
We changed that, I'm sorry, we did change it to.
you might want to speak into the mic in case.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
We did change it to the aluminum fence, the picket fence all the way around. It's not a chain link fence.
Okay.
I think originally it was, and staff had us change it.
Okay,
So.
that sounds better.
I think there's two pictures of the fence top.
Yeah, and it's on this
Right.
page that Matthew's got up, and it says aluminum. So
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the fence all the way around it.
So it's the fence all the way around except for the border with the houses, which is vinyl, or?
Vinyl, solid, it needed to be solid.
Thank you.
Is that an 8-foot fence? How tall a fence is it?
Sir?
How tall is the vinyl fence? Is that an 8-foot fence or a 6-foot fence, or?
I think it says on there, I believe it's 6, is it 6 foot? Is that what's required, 6 foot?
So I don't. What's the view shed then going to be like on the aluminum fence looking into this? I guess there's going to be landscaping all the way around where the aluminum fence, because you're going to see right through it.
You know what's giving me heartburn about this is the storage property that's on between Sulphur Springs Road and Northfield. It backs up to Sulphur Springs Road there right before you get to the bridge, and there is a chain link fence across there, and it just looks terrible. And this is no reflection on your project, but when we have kind of evolved now into, when we look at the storage buildings, they're more generally compact. They're more stories. They're more, from the outside, I think they're more attractive buildings. They don't just look like storage facilities. I think this is a step backwards as far as it looks more like a traditional storage facility. And I've been excited about all the ones that we've approved that had more of a almost warehouse type look as far as, and the materials and stuff that were being used on them. I think the ones that we've recently seen have been fairly attractive buildings. This to me seems to be a step backwards in what we've been approving, and I don't mean that to be derogatory towards your project, because I know your intentions are good, and I'm sure you're going to make it look as well as you possibly can. But with the visibility that this has, and of course I hope people on the interstate and the ramps are watching the road rather than looking off to the side of the road, but I guess there's going to be passengers in those cars that are going to look around, and it's going to have a direct reflection on our city as to what people are going to think when they're coming in and out of this heavily traveled, very visible area.
Will the storage facility be allowed to open up to any open air parking for like RVs, boats, things of that sort, so that you'd be able to see that from the street as well?
If that's planned as part of their business, they have to show it on their site plan. I asked if that was a part of it, and they said no, so I had them put a note on the site plan saying it wouldn't be permitted to store RVs or campers like you sometimes see. It is something that is allowed, but it does have to be on the plans and approved.
So just to confirm, it's only interior storage?
It's those roll-up, yeah. It's
The roll-up one, okay.
right. It's not climate controlled.
Thank you.
And to that point, the two larger buildings don't have the roll-up doors. It's only the long, slender buildings. And they're more of a 50% hardy, 50% brick mix to get that retail look. If you were to kind of envision plugging and playing the door with a storefront system on the smaller buildings, which are called Type B buildings, it'll give you that retail look. So it's like you noted, we've got the roll-up door consideration. It's on the next sheet. I believe a couple more. Let's try the next one. So there you go. So it's dealing with the roll-up doors. We tried to work as much as possible to kind of give it a retail flair. But like I said, if you were to plug and play those doors with a storefront assembly, it would be more what you see on a single-story retail type center. So, and then also instead of doing the conventional double pitch roof, we went with a single slope to try to give it a little more modern, current look to it as well.
So I'm going to ask two direct questions. Is there a page on here that gives us what the view shed will be from the interstate?
We have some aerial views, but I don't think we have an exact view in terms of if I were sitting or standing at X elevation looking at the site.
Okay.
We don't have that particular view, but we can provide that view.
And then, so, because Eddie had a good question, if we're going to see nothing but doors, then I don't know that we're going to like that. And so, and we're uneasy up here over the fact that we don't know what the view shed's going to be for this entire development. You with me?
Yeah.
And if you've got aluminum vents that is, you can see right through it. So what are the adjacent properties going to be that if this is not landscaped all the way around, I'm not sure that the aluminum fence is doing us a whole lot of good.
And to your point, we orientated the shorter buildings, the ones that actually have the exposed doors, to an elevation face to where you're unable to see the doors. Because if you were to go back to the overall site plan, you're going to see the short wall of the ones with the doors, and then like was noted earlier, there's a large screening of landscape that will conceal any elevation with the doors. So the two smaller buildings that you see are the only ones that's going to have the exterior roll-up door component to it. And all you're going to see from the roadside is the side of that elevation and maybe a slender view of it because it's going to be concealed by the drive aisle. And then on the complete planned south side, you're going to be completely screened by the landscaping. And I think it's one of those things, like the point you brought up earlier about maintaining the landscape row. I think as a phase two we're evolved, we could work with the client, Drew Luna, to maintain that existing and probably shift some buildings and keep that existing landscape infrastructure in place to keep that phase one concealed from a phase two. So, I mean, he's very flexible to deal with and he wants to do a good project and satisfy the city and make sure it's got long-term value for everybody.
And Matt, can you go to the landscaping plan? I think the fence, there's a perimeter planting strip around the property. So I think there's the fence, you can see the fence has landscaping in it, so.
So what about the west side? The west side does, I mean, if I'm looking at it, there doesn't look to be any landscaping. So that's the vinyl fence on the west side?
On the,
Mr. Halliburton, on the west side is adjacent to the proposed commercial out parcels.
Okay.
And so the west side will face the backs of those lots that will front on Florence Road.
Okay.
The vinyl fence will be along the east side, abutting the Florence Point single-family lots to the east.
What is the circle hatched area next to that row of hedges?
That's a fire truck emergency service turnaround.
and that's temporary with this phase.
The circle is?
Yes, ma'am. It's until we can get the full circulation in.
What's the material? Just what's the material?
Be asphalt.
Just asphalt? Just, it's curious because of the hatching, it looked to be something decorative of some sort. And then,
We're showing it's temporary.
what's the blue, in the elevations, the blue accents? Are those, is it a blue hardy board accent?
It's all hardy panel.
Wow, this is that. Can you go back to the overall view? Yeah, back, right there. So we are not talking about that. We're only space one.
So this was from earlier, okay?
Yeah, well, it's for the storage.
The storage, though, the other one's
Okay.
that's the blue that she said.
Makes sense.
Okay. So, and this is just my comment. I'm comfortable with phase one. What I'm not comfortable with is the balance. And I know we're only looking at phase one, but I know the balance is coming. And that's the piece that, because phase one can be screened well enough that it's not hitting the gateway to the city. But the balance of it is where I'm having more heartburn. So if we're only looking at phase one, fine.
And I think to your point, we would be working with planning it the same way with phase one to get a solution that met all needs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think very much like Warren. I'm fairly comfortable with the phase one part of it, but it's the expansion of this same exact type project going closer to the roadway and expanding that's giving me a little bit of concern.
I have heard some of your concerns earlier about franchise owners or making investments in our community and any perceived future approvals of plans. And so I suspect some of your hesitation is that if you approve this, that it would be suggesting that you're okay with the future phases. So what I can do, and Mr. McKnight can do, is make sure that our communications back, regardless of what your vote is today, is that there are some very real concerns with that second phase. We asked for a master plan because it is required in our planning process. So they provided us one, but I don't think that I think they just provided one for reference. We will make sure to communicate to them that they shouldn't have any, that there wasn't buy-in into that, and we can note something and put it in the file and say that we've had that conversation with them, because I think I do perceive that you don't want to give somebody the impression that that's okay and then later take away your ability to review it and how it looks in your gateway. Or any of those other type elements. So we can make sure that we communicate that. I'm sure that the team will today, but just as an extra effort, if communicating that concern is helpful, I'll be glad to do it.
All right, other questions or comments from the Planning Commission? No, all right. Anyone have a motion that they want to throw out and see what happens? I'll make a comment. I'll revert back to Mr. Smotherman's comment earlier that I feel like we're taking a step back with respects to these storage facilities. And that was my main concern about the screening. I think you've answered my questions there specific to this particular project, so I'm a little more comfortable with it. But some of the other applications that we've seen in the last even 18 to 24 months, I mean, they're using the facility itself to be more of a screening piece than even the landscaping. And the appeal of the building itself doesn't look like a storage facility. So we're going backwards here instead of what we've seen and we've seen many in the last 18 to 24 months. I mean, I can think of, well, there's two on Medical Center Parkway. There's one at Northfield or Rutherford Boulevard and Sulphur Springs Road. I mean, there's several that we've looked at just in the last 12 to 18 months. So anyway, I think that's what's making this one a little tougher.
Yeah, I think my point is we always try to raise the bar with everything that we approve. We try to improve it so that we learn from it and we come up with a better project even on the next project. And that is where I'm challenged with this, is because I don't think it's raising the bar. But I don't know that it's a bad project. I don't know that it's the wrong place for it. I don't know that it's, and so many examples of the recent projects we've seen, those buildings could be converted and used for something else. I mean, heck, some of them are so attractive, I think they make great office buildings and stuff. But in this particular case, this is a storage facility and nothing more, nothing less, and it's going to be that for the next 50, 75 years probably. So I'm just worried about how the ones that were designed this way in the past, how they have aged.
I will say, like I said, the building one, which is 24,000, it's got your conventional storefront, so forth of that nature, and it has the ability to be readapted into a different use. Same goes in terms of the way we raised the eave heights on the smaller buildings. They've got the ability to be readapted, and because we've actually got a clear span frame utilized versus the standard 10 by 10 column grid that you're going to see in a conventional. And I see your point. I mean, we do 100,000 square foot storage facilities because the common procedure now is 4 stories above grade, so forth of that nature. But the client on this one, their goal is to do everything on a cash basis and develop as the need grows and do it that way. And that's the reason we're going with the single story concept for this one. So like I said earlier, we're using the materials to try to drive that Class A look and try to tweak what was seen in the standard 1-story product from 10, 15 years ago and give it that look to where, if need be, you could pop out those roll-up doors, put some storefront in, and they could turn into office condos. So it's got the ability to be readapted because it's, like I said, it's clear span when you get inside the structure. So there is the ability to kind of bring new life into it and not always call that a self-storage type product.
Is there a way to, for you to show us, or even with the what you've got in front of us, or at some later date, what the view shed would look like from each side so that we can get a better handle or better understanding and feel more comfortable with it? Or
we have that project in Revit, so we could try to estimate where the road level is, topography based, and shoot a view in there. Now, obviously I don't have the landscaping modeled in, so forth of that nature, but I believe, and we could do that from a Google Maps perspective, but based on the existing berm and your view shed up, you're not going to see the top of these roofs because the eaves heights are sitting at 10.8 above finished grade. And by the time you get the landscaping in, you're going to see maybe a hint of the roof. But as soon as that landscape starts coming in, as Margaret Ann noted, 2 to 3 years down the road, your view is going to be completely concealed from the road. And that's the reason, back to the original point of kind of that screening between phase 1 and 2, we could easily adapt and shift buildings or something and keep that existing infrastructure in place, keep that separation in there, minus whatever is affected by the future drive out, and that keeps that phase 1 screened, and that keeps that landscaping buffer in place. And we could shift buildings, because like Margaret Ann noted previously, that phasing plan was our best guess and not a tailored design. And as the client's needs grow and as the project's utilized, we can reevaluate that and make something that really works and works through the view shed comments that we're hearing today.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, what do we want to do here?
Let me maybe go for some compromise and get us to the point that we can move forward. I think going back to Ken's original question of what is the sight line? What are we going to see when we look from the roadway over to the property? And we're Google mapping it up here as we speak and looking at the view across there. And it does look like the berm beside the interstate will definitely come into play on that sight line and view. But so often when we look at these projects, we do get that perspective of if you were standing here, what would you see? And with the berm landscaped, I think that, or at least behind the berm landscaped, it almost makes your project invisible. And if it's invisible, then I think a lot of us would breathe a lot more comfortable with what your intended use for this property is. It's not the use that's concerning me so much as the design of the buildings that you're going to use on your project.
And I would agree, like for phase one, it's completely, you're blind to play phase one. I think the scrutiny is going to come when that phase 2 or 3 comes to fruition. And that's where the talks that we're having today are going to be a little more elevated, and that's where that view shed, and we'll keep that in mind that we're going to do detailed views to pick up that. And as noted, the phase 2 is really not a factor at this time, but we get into that planning component when it may come online 2 years from now. That's when we will.
I think if we had pictures that would explain better than words what you're saying, I think that would be advantageous to us. I'm going to go ahead and make a motion that we defer it today and allow you to come back hopefully in a very soon near future and give us a presentation that would make us significantly more comfortable with what this view is going to be. And I think if we can do that, then I think I'm speaking for myself. I personally would be much more comfortable with making the decision if I just had that little bit more of visual information.
Okay.
We have a motion to defer. Any other comments, or is there a second?
I'll make the second, but I'll make a comment. I agree with Eddie. If I can see the view, then it'll help me make my decision fairly easy. If it's shielded with landscaping or with a different type of buffer, I'm good. But if it's not, and all we're going to see is a bunch of doors or the sides of doors, then I'll probably have a problem with it because it is such a prevalent place in the city. I don't want to come through just looking straight at that being the gateway. So I would agree if we can see that, and I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any other comments? All right. All in favor of the deferral motion, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you all very much.
Appreciate the
Look
time.
forward to y'all coming back.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Moving on to new business. We have a zoning application for approximately 0.54 acres located along South Manny Avenue, north of East Castle Street, to be rezoned from commercial highway to CCO to PUD, Manny Station PUD, and CCO. Rhett Kelton is the applicant. Ms. Kerr.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the Planning Commission. The subject property is located at 418 and 422 South Maney Avenue, north of East Castle Street. Property is approximately 0.54 acres. It is 2 lots. One is developed with a single-family residence, which will be removed, and one is undeveloped land. The property is currently zoned commercial highway and city core overlay districts. The applicant wishes to rezone the property to a planned unit district, and the proposed PUD, Maney Station PUD, would be constructed in one phase and would consist of single-family attached dwelling units and commercial uses. Zoning request will not remove the property from the CCO district. The proposed development would include one 3-story mixed-use building for commercial uses with one accessible single-family residential unit on the street level and single-family attached dwelling units on the upper 2 floors. Required on-site parking spaces are proposed to be located near the rear of the building, and the parking calculations include 25% reduction of the required on-site parking spaces in the CCO with the availability of adjacent on-street parking spaces. There will be 13 one-bedroom, single-family attached dwelling units with a density of approximately 22 dwelling units per acre. The primary amenity for the residential dwelling units will be a rooftop terrace. I will make a note that the second and third floors are residential one-bedroom units. They're asking for one additional handicap accessible apartment on the bottom floor. We're still working with them on how that's going to work, because right now the floor plan layout shows a patio coming off of that. Well, if it does, it's actually going to cover the sidewalk and go into the parking lot. So we're going to have to work with them on that. But the subject property is surrounded in all directions by commercial highway zoning. There's single-family dwelling directly to the north, as well as a small apartment building. The properties to the east across Maney Avenue consist of a single-family residential use and a 2-story office retail building. Directly to the south is a small commercial building. Immediately to the west are primarily residential uses, including mostly single-family dwellings. The future land use map recommends that neighborhood commercial is the most appropriate land use character for the subject property. The characteristics of a neighborhood commercial include low-intensity commercial land uses generally about the same scale and intensity level as a residential development within the suburban residential area, and clustered at intersections at community collector thoroughfares. Examples of uses in this land use character are professional offices, convenience stores, dry cleaners, post offices, coffee shops, and drugstores. Compatible existing zoning districts are CL, CF, CMR, CM, and CMRS 8. The proposed single-family attached and commercial uses in the PUD are not consistent with the neighborhood commercial land use character. The proposed development is more consistent with the urban commercial mixed-use land use character, which is shown on the land use map directly adjacent to this property to the west. The urban commercial mixed-use character includes multifamily residential, entertainment, restaurants, and other retail, general and professional offices where streets are framed by buildings with 0 to minimal front setbacks, multi-story structures conducive for pedestrian activity, and structured and on-street parking, where low-intensity residential uses should not be permitted. The Planning Commission will need to determine whether this is an appropriate instance to deviate from the future land use map and whether or not the adjacent urban commercial mixed-use character is more appropriate for the property. The applicant is available to make a presentation or go over their plan with you, and I will be available after their presentation to also answer questions. Planning Commission will need to discuss this zoning request and then schedule it for a public hearing. Staff recommends a public hearing date of June the 3rd.
Thank you, Amelia. My name is Clyde Roundtree with Huddleston Steel Engineering. I'm representing Mr. Rhett Kelton, who's available he'll come up after me in a few minutes just to kind of explain the vision for the development. And also Brian Oliver, the architect, is here. So Chairman Halliburton, thank you for the opportunity, Commissioners. I'd just like to go ahead and introduce Rhett Kelton. This is an opportunity to do some more infill in our downtown area. He's excited about the possibility. This is a big opportunity for him, big investment for him. So he's been kind of working through it with us, and we're excited about the possibilities that this product can do for downtown, this project can do for downtown. And so with that in mind, Rhett's going to come share the vision, then I'll walk through the plan, and then Mr. Oliver will walk through the architecture.
Thank you for letting me be here. My name is Rhett Kelton. When I first ran across this property, it apparently used to be a meth house. And I was like, this is not what we want. What I'm seeing now is a place for young professionals or empty nesters to come, to live, to be close by in this urban environment, be in walking distance of the downtown square and all the surrounding areas, have good convenient access to the Broad Street and the traffic that goes along with there, but ideally being in the urban environment, providing that downtown walking distance opportunities. Ideally, I'm seeing professionals, young professionals, some people that have just downsized, perhaps grad students at MTSU, perhaps a young married couple who's looking for a starter home. That idea, but want to be able to stay in that nice, convenient place. Ideally, on the first floor in the commercial section, I would love to get a coffee shop there. Just having a nice little neighborhood coffee shop, having a facility like a dance studio or quiet business there. Some of it will be associated or set aside for offices. You got your professionals, accountants, architects. What I'm envisioning this is to be sort of a early to bed, early to rise environment where somebody could live upstairs, come downstairs, have a cup of coffee, and then walk across the street or walk right into their office. I'm excited about the whole area. I'm looking to invest more and bring more opportunities for this downtown Murfreesboro area.
Thank you
So
very
that's-
much.
yeah.
Thank you, Rhett. And as you mentioned, the unique part of the development is that it is, kind of moving in the direction of an infill that we've kind of seen come along the line. A lot of the clients we're working with now are just as similar. It's different. In fact, it's a mixed-use product, but we are seeing a lot of folks being very interested in downtown, catalyzed by the CCO, catalyzed by the sewer allotments. So we're excited about the possibility this development could bring. I think unique features of this, as Amelia mentioned, it is commercial down for the primary for the most part. There's one home down low that's the handicap accessible home, and Mr. Oliver will talk more about that. But the fact that we're mixing the use is appealing, I believe, from a lot of different facets, especially close to downtown. But also, the 13 units are all one-bedroom homes. It's important to acknowledge that because that's kind of pushing our density up. The density is high, 28 units per acre, but that's really because it's all one bedroom. If it were two bedrooms, it'd be half the density. But they're smaller townhomes or single-family attached homes, and so they're in the 500 square foot to 600 square foot range. So it's going to appeal to a different target market than a lot of the folks we've seen come through our office. In terms of it, there's not a lot that's offered that allows for more of that young professional kind of starter home versus having to do a apartment type of living. So these are for sale homes. They are really specifically designed for, as you mentioned, the empty nester, the young professional, someone who's wanting to own something, but and live close to downtown. With that in mind, as you mentioned, the home that's being taken down, that street in particular right now, it's a little rough. The home next to it is basically a knockdown home. There's apartments right on the corner that are one lot down from the home adjacent to us. Rhett would be taking down one home, and there's a vacant lot. And then right next to his potential development is a beautician shop. So the building across the street, I'm not exactly sure what's going on. There's a little history. Matthew probably will tell us about the history of that building. But it's a 3-story all brick building. It's a nice looking building. It's taken a while to get it constructed, so I'm not sure of kind of how that's developing, but we'll be in character with that building for sure as far as how we would look. We're excited about a lot of folks are going up top for any kind of open space, the rooftop, and kind of providing the outdoor space. We're parked adequately. Our setbacks work within the CCO, so we feel like we can fit on the lot, fit on the site that we're given. Again, the things we're asking for, and I think Amelia mentioned it, that we're in that neighborhood. As far as the 2035 plan, the neighborhood commercial is more consistent. We're right up against it on the backside, and because what we're running into, bless you, Matthew, with how the 2035 we've been interacting with that, it seems like half the projects I propose they're not consistent with the 2035 plan. So that, especially that suburban residential that kind of shows up real close to downtown, this is probably more fitting with the density that we're pushing forward or trying to get, with that neighborhood commercial that's right adjacent to us. So not really sure about the history of how that designed, because it just showed Manny basically have a little strip on the 2035 plan of this type of zoning. So we're asking for something a little different than what's recommended in the 2035 plan. But as Mr. Kelton mentioned, this is probably what we're going to see more of downtown, hopefully, as far as trying to find some way to get density downtown, but still keep the mixed-use component to it as well. So with that in mind, Amelia mentioned that we're still working through the bottom floor unit, because that's really a codes department kind of issue, whether that's even possible or not. And because we're over parked, if we have to commit another parking space to some some ground level open space, formal open space, we can do that by losing one of the parking lots where that unit is on the far end of the building. So with that in mind, Mr. Brian Oliver is the architect. He would like to walk you through the architectural components and any questions you may have. And after the presentation, we're here for any questions you may have, but thank you for the opportunity to speak.
My name is Brian Oliver, and happy to look at the architectural plans with you guys. The building itself is mostly brick with details of ephes, and so a lot of the details that we've worked with the city before on some other projects we've incorporated into this project as well. As it meets the sky, we've got different levels of the roof up and down, and multi-tones of brick, which I've got brick samples, 4 or 5 brick samples there we can look at. As mentioned, there are 6 units per floor on the upper 2 floors, and then 1 unit downstairs. I did get confirmation from Mr. Holtz that the unit that we have downstairs does meet the requirements for the ADA unit that we had a conversation last week, and he sent an email yesterday afternoon saying that it did indeed meet the requirements. Commercial on the ground floor, as we've mentioned, the unit on the back, the single unit on the back is entered from inside the building itself. You can see it on the top drawing on the right-hand side. It has windows and a exterior door that goes to a fenced-off area. All the units will be protected by security locks and things like that. I know security in these type of facilities are very important. That's really it. It's a brick building. It's a nice design, we think, that meets with what the city's asked for, and we look forward to putting it in the city.
I have a question. Clyde, I don't know if you want to address it. Can we see what the approved uses are with respects to the commercial, or is it just a blanket commercial zoning request?
Mr. Halliburton in the back. We have all the proposed uses in the. There they are, Matthew. Matthew has them up on the screen. I'm sorry, Amelia, I got it peeled back. So yes, they're all listed, and Amelia had me put them in alphabetical order, so I did my best. 2 revisions. No, it's so I think it's we removed the things that we felt like were considered potentially the tattoo parlor was removed from one side to the other, so as a prohibited use. I think there was a few others. I'm trying to think, Amelia. We went through them a few times, Ken. So they're all there as far as the permitted versus the prohibited uses. I would say that right now, if you look at the facade, it has kind of like it looks like there would be 3 distinct type of businesses the way the entrances would work. I would think from a development standpoint that'll probably be open. That'll probably be divided based on who the client base is. So the facade's going to kind of project something that may be a little bit different than what's going on internally. Like if he has a dance studio, they probably need more room than if you can imagine that being about 3,800 square feet, and each of those being 1,600 square feet or 1,200 square feet, it'll probably break down. It could break down a little different than that.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Clyde, I think you've been on a roll. You've brought really good projects before us here lately, and I think this is another addition to what the city really envisioned when Manny Avenue was redesigned. And we've seen a couple buildings go in there here lately that have really raised the bar of what's expected in that area, and I think this continuous improvement of bringing density where density is good. There's some places where density in our city is not the best thing in the world, but this particular place, it's ideal for it. It's close to the downtown area. It's within walking distance. It's got a nice design. I think appearance-wise, I love the balconies. I always like buildings that look alive. I like the roof. Being able to go up on the roof and enjoy spending time with your neighbors and stuff. I think that helps develop strong neighborhoods, and building strong neighborhoods is what makes Murfreesboro special as far as our community. And so I think there's a lot of wins that you have drawn and pulled together on this project, and I compliment you. I think it's a very, very nice project.
Thank you. I would just add to that, we really try to want to enhance that Manny streetscape that's already happening. So Brian didn't mention, but that lower level will have awnings, and we'll have a lot of architectural detail that kind of bring that scale down. And Amelia and I we're not going back and forth as much as the building kind of undulates as part of our design requirements, but we'll have landscaping on the front of the building. It just won't necessarily be all the way across the front. But we want to try to soften it and bring in that streetscape character, benches, those kind of things to kind of bring that urban scale down. So thank you.
Mr. Rountree, I got a couple questions. In the plan book, it's got no foundation plantings on the western side and the northern side of the building. I assume that's because of the sidewalks, just a clean connection from the building to the sidewalks.
Yes, sir.
And then I saw also compliment you on sensitivity to the SEPTED lighting and safety issues. What about the parking in the back as far as the lighting of the parking? Because you've got kind of residential homes tucked in there. So what's the thinking there?
Mr. Martin, we haven't really got into the specifics on the lighting plan as much as obviously we'd have to respect the 0.5 foot candle or 0 foot candle off the property line. More than likely, and me kind of set it up on the right hand side is kind of the residential side. On the left hand side of the development, it's really kind of the commercial side. That's where that beautician shop is. Mm-hmm. So more than likely, I could imagine the light poles being on that right hand side, kind of broadcasting out towards the parking lot away from the residential. We'll definitely need something. It's a little bit different because it's kind of a little peninsula back there, right, and it kind of drops down grade-wise. So, probably wall packs on the building, but more than likely poles against that right property line that kind of broadcast onto the parking lot away from the residential. And the residential there, it's kind of hit and miss. Like I mentioned, on the corner of apartments, and then there's an empty lot that kind of feeds out to the adjacent road, and then the residential starts a little bit down the line. So he's even looked at the possibility. There's a lot that's kind of long and narrow we thought could get additional parking from our width, but it just didn't make sense for us. There is something, we'll just bring it up because it happened. There's a possibility of getting another piece of property adjacent to this that would be very attractive to this development. That deal is not done at all. He's spoken to the owner there. It literally, he bought the house the same time that person bought the house. Rhett knew exactly what he wanted to do. This person has no idea what they want to do. So it's one of those kind of things where he's going to be talking to that owner to see if there's any possibility, and we would probably expand this program out a little bit more. But that's in the works.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions for Clyde? All right.
Thank you.
Any questions from a planning commission for staff or the applicant? And if not, we have a motion to set a public hearing as of June 3rd.
Make a motion to set a public hearing for June 3rd.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to set a public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Have a public hearing. Item B, zoning application for approximately 5.09 acres located along Robert Rose Drive to amend the North Thompson Place PUD, also known as Gateway Village, to expand the uses permitted. Swanson Development LP applicant. You're back.
We are asking that you consider scheduling a public hearing for June 3rd for an amendment to PUD zoning plan unit district. This PUD is known as North Thompson Place PUD, but since that time, I think it's been referred to as the Gateway Village PUD. You probably know it as Swanson's building on Thompson Lane next to the hospital. It's one of our first mixed-use, truly mixed-use sites and buildings. The two buildings A and B, which are the perpendicular buildings, are office and retail mixture. In the back, you have residential and a garage. And the zoning was done in 2008, and I think it's still a very unique project all these years later. As I mentioned, they are located next to the hospital, and they are also just south of Candlewood Suites and north of Salons by JC. The PUD was originally approved in 2008 and has been constructed and remained such since then. We have recently been made aware that a real estate office wanted to expand into the first floor, and offices was not identified as a use that's permitted within the PUD. As you know, PUDs can be very specific, and they need to give you the proposed uses, and so staff felt that it made sense to have a real estate office as one of the options here. So we asked the owner-developer, Mr. Swanson, to look at the uses comprehensively, see if there's anything else while they're going through this amendment process, anything else they'd like to add. The impetus is adding offices as a use, but Mr. Swanson and his representative, Mr. Taylor, have identified several other uses that they would like to allow. The first floor uses are different than the second floor uses. So some of the uses they're proposing to add are already allowed on one of the floors, but not the other, and some of them are brand new. So you do have a list of the proposed additions. And if there are any modifications you'd like to suggest prior to the public hearing, they can, of course, incorporate those. And the evening of the public hearing, if you have some additional suggestions or changes, they'll be able to incorporate those as well. The future land use map does identify this as a commercial mixed-use land use, and so the proposed amendment is consistent with the future land use map. If you have no questions, we would ask that you schedule it for a public hearing on June 3rd.
Any questions? No questions. Do we have a motion to set a public hearing on June 3rd?
Motion to approve a June 3rd public hearing.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That is set. All right, staff reports and other business. First item is proposed amendments to the zoning ordinance to section 26, off-street parking, queuing, and loading, regarding off-site parking agreements, joint parking agreements, and other miscellaneous items. City of Murfreesboro Planning Department applicant. Mr. Blomley.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Halliburton. This item is one that we brought to you back in April to schedule a public hearing for May the 6th. It's what we think are some really good improvements to Section 26 of our zoning ordinance, which, as you mentioned, deals with off-street parking, queuing, and loading requirements. We are posing a rewrite of the portion of this section dealing with off-site parking agreements to add some more flexibility for off-site parking agreements. We have put in some caps on the number of narrow spaces that parking lots can use outside of the CCO. Really, what we've done is by administering the zoning ordinance for years and years, as we do, we find things in our zoning ordinance where clarity could be added. So we're really trying to add some clarity. One of the things, or the primary reason though, why we withdrew this item from the May 6th Planning Commission agenda for a public hearing was regarding dimensional requirements for garages, and it's kind of limited where we would require these. It would only be where garages were being sought to meet minimum parking requirements, and it would only be in the RM12, RM16, and RSA type 2, 3, or RSA type 1, 2, and 3 zones. So it would have relatively limited applicability in the grand scheme of things, but nonetheless it would affect primarily proposed townhome developments. And so we received word from several developers that they had concerns with the dimensions that we were proposing. So Mr. McKnight and myself, we thought it best to pull it off the agenda on May 6th and kind of have a stakeholder meeting, if you will, to get that feedback from the development community and get their thoughts on what they thought would be appropriate dimensions. And I think we had that stakeholder meeting yesterday afternoon in this very room, had about 7 or 8 developer builders here in the room with us and got some really good feedback from them. And I think that we agreed on a few things. I think we agreed on the fact that we are trying to encourage garages on single-family attached developments. That we all agree that that's a desirable element of a single-family attached dwelling unit. And I think we all agreed that designing to a standard is better than designing to no standard and having to wrestle to get to a point of agreement. And so just now what we had to do is to talk about what those dimensions are. And I think that we're really close to having a dimensional requirement that will work for everybody. And so I think we still need to vet that a little bit internally, but we feel good about bringing this back to the Planning Commission today to set the public hearing and to have the public hearing set for June 3rd. So we feel very good about the fact that we had that stakeholder meeting yesterday, and we feel like we made a lot of progress during that meeting. And we appreciate the developers, builders who attended that meeting and gave us their valuable feedback. And so we would ask that you schedule this public hearing for June the 3rd.
I have a question because several of the folks reached out to me with respects to these dimensions. So at what point in time are we going to know what those dimensions are, even though we're setting the public hearing for June?
We'll publish that in the agenda for the June 3rd meeting.
Okay.
And we made a promise to them yesterday at that meeting that we would email them in advance. They gave us a number to consider yesterday, and I believe it was unanimous. Mr. McKnight can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was unanimous on their part that if that number that we threw out at the meeting yesterday, or that was discussed at the meeting yesterday, was included in the agenda, that they would have no issue with that.
Thank you, Matthew.
Matthew, one real quick question. I'm sorry, I can't find it exactly, but when I read through this before, there was a section in there that's read like as if you purchased a single-family home and the parking requirement had been dictated by use of the garage space, that you could be cited or fined by not using that. Is that still a part of this, what we're proposing, that we're setting a public hearing for?
Yes. So what we are, so right now our ordinance is a little unclear on how garages should be treated. Should they be allowed for single-family attached dwellings? Should they be allowed to count toward the minimum parking requirements? One reading of that says if we treat them as multifamily, there's a specific allowance for multifamily dwellings to allow garage parking spaces to count toward the minimum parking requirements, and there's a specific prohibition for single-family single-family dwellings to allow garage spaces to count toward their minimum parking requirements. So we've been taking more of a liberal interpretation with that and treating them as multifamily, because townhomes are a little bit of a hybrid of a multifamily and single-family use. And so what we want to do is we want to put, if we are going to allow parking in garages to count towards minimum parking requirements, we don't want the representation to be made that these garages are going to be available for parking, and then the residents or the developer not put the proper steps in place to ensure that they will be used for parking, and people put their jet skis in there, or their you know, their junk, as I have done most of my adult life. So we're trying to put some stopgaps in place so that if we do allow them to use the garages to count toward their minimum parking requirements, that they're available for the parking of vehicles as they have indicated that they intend them to be.
Yeah, just general comment. I think it makes great sense what we're talking about from the standpoint of saying if we're going to count those spaces and give the developer credit for that, then they should be used as that. No disagreement with that at all. It gets a little uneasy for me after an end user has bought that unit and it's, you know, their property to say, hey, you're not parking in your garage, so we're gonna fine you or cite you for that. I'm a little uncomfortable with that, but
Shouldn't that be HOA enforced?
Yeah, so we're writing it as a zoning regulation. So we do have the ability to enforce that. I mean, I'll tell you right now, the way our zoning enforcement program works is it's complaint driven. So if there are parking problems, we would investigate that as a component of the complaint that we have received regarding parking problems. But we are also including a provision in there that it has to be included in the CCRs so that kind of the first line of defense will be the HOA.
okay.
And then if it's brought to our attention that someone is not using their garage for the parking of vehicles and it's causing a parking issue, I think that our involvement would probably be minimal unless it's causing a parking issue so bad that we would get a complaint that parking is spilling out into the street, blocking driveways, blocking mailboxes, when it rises to that level.
I know it's a tough issue. I just raise it just for the point of the conversation.
Yeah, it's no doubt it would be a difficult thing to enforce. I think what we're trying to do is just to put some teeth in there to it, to kind of grant some flexibility to the developers, so that we do not discourage garages from being used in townhome developments, but that we also have the appropriate teeth to enforce it if that was to be abused. But we're certainly open if the Planning Commission has any thoughts about, you know, if that language is too harsh or if that needs to be modified, we're certainly all ears.
Mr. Smotherman, I would add that presently it is up to the HOA to enforce, and developers have volunteered to adopt CCRs that require people to use, or at least to have it available for parking. I'm not sure we force somebody to park their car in it, but at least it's available and it's not filled with a boat or something else. And our thought is that to make that, if we're going to make it a part of the zoning ordinance, then it would be enforceable by the city. And as Matthew said, it's fairly rare because we're almost always complaint driven by these kinds of things, and wouldn't think the city would be involved in it. But nonetheless, if we're going to make it a city requirement, a zoning requirement, then it would be enforceable by the city.
Yeah, but I almost think we should go back against the HOA rather than the individual property owner if the case were to arise, because if they're not doing their job, then to me it gives us, it kind of keeps us out of it if the HOA understood that they were accountable for people in that area not parking correctly, rather than having to go to each individual person and say, you've got a boat or you've got a jet ski or you've got something. It would be better if it was a more broad perspective of anybody that's within that HOA is held accountable, and that kind of puts the pressure on everybody in that neighborhood to enforce the regulation rather than going after the individual. I would rather hold the HOA accountable for the enforcement of it, and if they fail the enforcement, that the complaint would go against the HOA. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do, and I agree completely, except that sometimes the HOAs are non-responsive, and sometimes an HOA, many of them are not going to be financed to the point that they could do anything about it. They could write a letter maybe, but if that didn't work, there's no money in many HOAs to hire an attorney and you know, take an action against someone who's not complying with whatever it is that he's supposed to comply with. So that, I think that.
But if the HOA was held accountable, then, and I'm assuming that when we say you have to have an HOA on this property, that's contingent in the agreement of building the development, then.
Jen, most of them do. The HOA is required if ever there's common property, but I suspect there are some townhouse type developments that don't have any common property and are just don't have an HOA. I'm not sure of that.
Yeah, with the amenities that we require now with parks and
right, if there's an amenity,
all those things that come along with it, I mean, I would think that every HOA would understand that, you know, there's a common component here, but there's also a level of expectation when you say you're going to have an HOA. It can't be we're going to have an HOA. Okay, we got one. You know, there has to be some understanding that it has to be a functional HOA, and that they have to understand that they have legal responsibilities, and you know, and I'm going back to a friend of mine who had a trailer outside of his house, and the HOA immediately sent him a letter and said, you know, you will remove this, and he didn't like it. But I told him, I said, shut up. I said, you know, everybody else in your neighborhood is playing by the same rules. You have to play by those rules too. It's part of living in your neighborhood. But I would rather us, because that way, if everybody in the neighborhood understood, hey, we're part of this HOA and we're going to be held accountable for any actions that are taken against this HOA, that kind of puts them in a situation that they're going to say, you know, we're supporting the HOA here rather than the individual. Because, I mean, when you start supporting individuals, then it just comes down to a popularity contest, or who can get the most votes within the HOA to say, you know, this is okay or not okay.
Mr. Smotherman, I would say that our proposed ordinance does require it to be included in the CCRs so that the HOA would have to, it would be enforceable by the HOA. So, and I think just based on my experience, what will likely happen is that people will likely complain first to their HOA, and their HOA will try to handle the matter, and then kind of maybe as a secondary means of trying to get results, they will complain to us. Yeah. But I think that if there is a violation on a given property, in general, and Mr. Ives can correct me if I'm wrong, but the responsibility for that violation lies both in the property owner and in the tenant as well. If it's a rental property, I don't know, Mr. Ives, would we have any authority to cite the HOA if for a transgression on an individual's property?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't know that anything like that is set up. I'm not sure it couldn't be set up, but right now we certainly can cite the HOA if they don't mow the common area, for instance. Right.
Yeah, I could just see this HOA saying, hey, you've got a problem with your neighbor, they're violating the law, there's a city ordinance against it, call the city. You know, I think
that's exactly what they would do.
Yeah, I think if we take on that responsibility, then we're taking on that responsibility, and I'm not sure that we want to start trying to manage neighborhood disputes over whether or not somebody's got a storage building behind their house or a doghouse in the wrong place, or.
And I definitely agree that that is a very, very legitimate question. And when we wrote that in there, we're looking at, okay, we got some issues with how the parking is working. What can we do to fix it? And one of them was to address the size of a garage, right, to make it, you really can park a car in there if you're going to get credit for that. And another one was enforcement, and we talked about that, and the way it's drafted now is that the city could at least have a role in enforcing that. I think that's a very good question for you and at the next step city council to consider whether we want to get into that business or not. So that's a good question, a fair question, and I can argue both ways. That's certainly, yeah, if we're going to make it a requirement, then we should be able to enforce it. And if we want to leave it as something that the developer and the HOA are going to be responsible for, then I think we have to recognize that there's going to be times that they're not going to, someone is not going to comply, the HOA is not going to enforce. And so our theory that parking is handled by having this number of garages is going to fall apart a little bit, at least, because that number of garages is not going to be available for parking. So it's a good question.
Also, the size of the garage. I know that most of the concern that I've heard from developers and builders is when we deviate away from what is considered standard size products, when we start talking about garage door openings and basically most of the plans that they've talked to me about are 20 by 20. And most of them said, listen, we get, you know, and my whole point to them is, listen, you've got to have room enough in there for your vehicles if you're going to take it for parking credit. But most of them have said, we don't mind giving you more depth, but we really have a problem with width because that starts limiting the number of lots we can put on the property or within a development. And so I think that's the main thing that I understand what they're hearing, and I think we need to take that in consideration. You know, if there's a compromise that says, you know, if we're going to deviate from that 20 by 20, which they tell me is pretty much a standard, if we're going to deviate from that, let's go with depth rather than width, because that allows you to get your trash can maybe in there or a couple bicycles against the back wall and still have room for your cars to pull in side by side. Because I mean, I just foresee, you know, it's Matthew's junk in the garage that's stacked along the wall that's going to prevent you from getting that vehicle in there. If it's against the back wall, it may, Matthew, just move your stuff to the back wall and maybe you can get your two cars in there. I think.
My stuff, it's my kids' stuff.
but
Thomas, the engine and.
But my point is, let's whatever we present, let's make sure that it abides by what standard size garage doors are, what standard size man doors are, and let's don't start mandating things that make every project a custom project. I mean, let's try to avoid that.
Yeah, and Mr. Smotherman, the outcome of our stakeholder meeting yesterday, we arrived at a pretty standard size, and our ordinance says nothing about garage door sizes or the other door sizes. It is strictly the internal dimensions of the garage. So I think that after we vet this information a little bit internally in the next day or two, I think that if the numbers that were discussed at yesterday's meeting are, if we think that they're doable from our standpoint, then the folks that showed up at our stakeholders meeting thought that they were both a standard size and that they would not have an impact on their ability to get the yield that they wanted to get.
Okay, thank you.
If I can, Matthew, I'll make just one last comment and we'll get off this. But if I had to lean in a direction of, do we change the parking requirement or do we not count garage spaces versus we cite people that aren't using garage spaces, I would do one or two and not three. From the standpoint that I would be closer to changing the parking requirement or increasing the amount of spaces by not counting the garage than I would, because I think it's just different. It feels different. To use Mr. Smotherman's example, the individual that had a trailer parked beside his house, when you close your garage door, there's this mental aspect of you're inside my house, whether you are or not. That part gets a little uncomfortable for me.
I think if...
I understand.
Yeah, and I agree with that too. I think whether we explicitly say that it's a citable violation or not, I think that if we put it in the ordinance, it's an enforceable ordinance. And so I think, yeah, that is one of the questions. Do we want garages to count towards the parking requirements? And if we do, and we put these standards in there, they're standards that are enforceable both in the administration of the review of new developments and after the fact when they're someone's home.
Yeah, and there may be two adults and a child living in a house where there's a two-car garage. Well, the assumption is if that child is driving that there's probably going to be three vehicles there. And we're saying that those 3 vehicles, 2 of them need to be in the garage probably. But let's reverse that and say there's a gentleman or a lady who has decided they're going to buy a home in that neighborhood and they live there by themselves. Can they not store their boat and their jet ski in the garage alongside their car or truck or whatever it is they drive? That's where I've got a problem, is when we start telling people how they use the space inside their house. And I think that's kind of where Ronnie's going, and I agree with you 1,000% that maybe we need to just completely come up with a different plan that says don't consider that parking space and change the standard of what it is we expect outside that garage, you know.
It's a really tough issue, I acknowledge, and I know you guys are trying to come up with a good solution, so I appreciate that. I just want to be honest and straight about that.
Because every situation is going to be different. I mean,
Well, I appreciate the comments. This is good discussion, and we will chew on this some more at the staff level too, and come back with a recommendation.
So move to set a public hearing June 3rd, is that right?
Are we ready, or do we need
Or
more time to consider a couple of these issues?
Yeah, Mr. McKnight, what would you recommend?
as far as
Do we need to request or no action today, or?
Yes, I would like to do that and then get better direction. I think that would be much better.
I don't think this is on fire to the point that we're going to hurt ourselves if we have the public hearing in July.
You want a deferral?
I don't even think a deferral is necessary. I think we'll just bring it up at a future day meeting to schedule when we're ready.
We'll bring it back when we're ready, right?
All right. The next item is hear report from staff regarding modified language for temporary signage and consider request from legal department to modify the planning commission's conditions of approval, both pertaining to zoning request for PSO, planned signage overlay zoning for approximately 30 acres located along North Thompson Lane, West College Street, and West Northfield Boulevard, New Vision Baptist Church applicant.
All right, I'll take that for at least initially. New Vision is the applicant for the PSO, but essentially the applicant to put this back on the agenda today is a combination of the building codes department in terms of the temporary sign and the legal department in terms of the mural. So let me first mention the temporary signage. I believe in your packet, and I think you had another page on your desk, I'm not sure, but the page from the booklet that looks like this, it should be at the back of your packet, I believe.
It's up on the screens right now.
Okay. Essentially, we added, revised or added paragraph 4 or section 4 to the top one and section 3 to the bottom one. Our goal in this was to allow them some flexibility in terms of when and how they use temporary signage, but also at the same time to not make it appear that they could put up a temporary sign and leave it up forever. So for the banner, we added the provision that there would be one per entrance to the property, could be used for 2 months before an event and removed 2 days after the event. So if they've got a new building under construction out there, they could have a banner that says, new kids building coming in October, whatever. They could have that up for 2 months, and then they'd have to take it down once the building's complete. And with regard to the feathers, we drafted this that they could have 2 per entrance to the property, and it could be used for 2 weeks at a time per event. So if they have any given event, they could have a feather sign out there promoting that event for 2 weeks, and that's all they could have it. I guess if they have event after event after event, they could have the signs up there for a fair amount of time. That's really not different than any other temporary sign provision, but we feel that this gives them some flexibility, and yet at least, and I think they understand that it's not going to be city's desire to see temporary signs out there all day, every day, every day of the year. So staff thinks this is a good approach to this and a workable approach. So there's any comments or questions about those two items, be happy to try to answer them. And Teresa is also here. I believe she's still here. If you have other, who's the sign administrator in the codes department.
Thank you, Mr. Ives. Any questions from the Planning Commission?
What did he say while I was gone?
Don't leave.
I had to leave. I didn't have a choice.
Sorry about that.
The roof was on fire.
On the sheet, for this page, it was page 9.0 of their booklet, we added a provision to the banner sign that says they can have the banner up for 2 months before an event, and then have to remove it 2 days after.
Okay.
And on the flags, or the feathers rather, that they'd have 2 per entrance, they could have it for 2 weeks per event. And I guess there's an assumption that they're not going to have a new event every 2 weeks, so with new feathers up every 2 weeks.
David, the only reason I made you repeat that was because I think I was part of the problem when this was caused.
Part of the discussion, I would say.
Yeah, that's putting it nicer than I would. I was part of the problem because, as from a legal standpoint, I think we did 2 things probably wrong, and I think you've explained one of them. I think the other one is probably the Reed versus Gilbert case, City of Gilbert case,
right,
where we're starting to look at what the content of the signage is.
I'll come to that next.
And the Supreme Court ruled
right.
in 2015 that we can't have any decision that we make that involves what the content is on that sign. And if we start saying you can only have them for such an event for so long, then we're starting to read the signs and look at the content of them. So I think that's the part that probably would get us in the most trouble. So I apologize for making that mistake. I was present when that went through the Supreme Court.
And so I'm not real sure this takes a motion. You asked for us to modify the language and come back to you. I guess a motion to approve the revised page or sheet number 9.0 would be appropriate.
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any other questions or comments? If not, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It passes.
And to follow up on the Reed v. Gilbert discussion, this is sort of the mural issue is a bit multifaceted. First of all, our sign ordinance exempts murals from the definition of being a sign, and therefore murals are not regulated by the sign ordinance. And as a practical matter, murals aren't regulated by any other ordinance of the city, with the exception today that a mural can only be on 2 sides of a building and it cannot be on the front. The reason the mural was a part of the PSO is that this building that they want to place the murals on, they're really going to place the murals on 4 sides of a 6-sided building. So the front of the building that is around kind of at the back side from the Vanderbilt parking lot will not have a mural on it. That'll be the building frontage, but because of the somewhat unusual shape of this building, they have murals on more than 2 sides of the building. So it was that aspect of the sign ordinance that we were asking to essentially be buried as part of this PSO. Now, in the brilliance of hindsight, how staff should have presented this to you, had it presented to you, was not have had a mural on that building at all. And a sign, I think, as you saw it, I think it says New Vision, and then there's a stylized cross that they use as part of their signage. That would have been on the building, and on the rest of the building would have been, or that facade would have been blank with the words "future mural" on it. So you would not have seen anything at all it would have just said "future mural," and if you'd have asked what that was going to be, we would have said it's being planned, but it's a mural, and the murals are exempt from the sign ordinance, and so we'll all see it when it gets done. However, we weren't that smart a few months ago, unfortunately, and so the mural was there, and then it caused some discussion, and then y'all, and they'd indicated that may not be the final design, and y'all asked to see the final design. which sounds like that's a condition of approval. And it's not, there is no, staff does not approve murals, planning commission does not approve murals, city council does not approve murals, and we really don't want it to look like we are undertaking in any way the approval of a mural. So again, that's pure content. The artistic design of it, the message of it is up to them. We don't want to approve it. So what I would like to have is a motion to delete the condition that they bring back the mural for review. Delete that from the approval so that we can go forward without that. Our plan would be that that sheet will be modified when the booklet goes to City Council. It'll be modified to remove that suggested proposed mural or concept mural and simply say future mural on that building facade. Be happy to try to answer any questions.
The only question I have is, I don't know that this vote would have any bearing on my question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Where are we with them wanting to have a mural on 4 sides, but the ordinance says they can only have it on 2 sides?
That is one of the, by approving the PSO, that's one of the changes to the sign ordinance that you're approving. Just
Okay.
like you approved the vertical sign posts in a couple of places, or several places out front that are not any place in the sign ordinance. And I can't remember, I think there's some other, Teresa, you can help me out. There's a couple of other changes, different signs that they're having and different size signs from what the sign ordinance would allow.
Okay.
So that's just part of the PSO is the approval of mural on more than 2 sides.
Okay, so I kind of caused this, so I'll try and kind of correct it. I'll make a motion that we remove all content and conversation that took place concerning the mural and not require that any conditions be applied to the mural as to the approval or disapproval of this project. Is that close enough?
I think we have a second. All those in favor of that motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Mr. Ives.
Thank you.
All right, Matthew, I think you said we have one other item of vote.
Yes, sir. Mr. Huddleston and Mr. Ives have some information for you.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Afternoon, Mr. Halliburton, members of
How
the
are
Planning
you?
Commission. Sorry I left my iPad unattended earlier. Interrupted the meeting. I was loitering in the rotunda while you guys were carrying on the heavy business of the Planning Commission. We do have one item, Matthew, if you could pull up our exhibits here. You got them on the screen.
Cable department could pull that up.
Yeah, I put it up on the big TV so I can see it as well. We're trying to resolve a title issue to a parcel in Greenbrier subdivision. Let's see, Matthew, if you would show the city GIS. So this is what we see on the GIS today, a little 40 by 40 rectangle in the middle of the lot, address 732 Greenbrier. We can't find title to it. The title company can't find title to it. The surveyor can't find title to it, but it shows in the tax records that the city owns it. There's a tax account and a property account with it. We're kind of throwing our hands up and say we don't know how it's there, why it's there. We don't know that the city ever had an interest in it. What I'm asking you to do today to help resolve a cloud on the title of the lot at 732 Greenbrier is to approve mandatory referral that we quit claim any interest that we may find in this property before we prepare the quit claim deed for execution by the mayor. I'll be glad to answer any questions or solicit your help to help us find the source of title to it.
Let me jump in with one thing. That little square is part of a drainage easement, and we would keep our drainage easement interest in it, but quit claim title to it. Now, the borrower I think he's trying to sell, he's either selling or refinancing, I don't know which. but
Seller,
he-
yeah, it's a pending sale.
He can't, the title company's objecting because that back piece has no access. It's landlocked parcel, so they don't want to insure his title to that. The bank, I'm sure, would like to have title insurance on that part too. So we can cure that, I think, by quit claiming title. We certainly want to keep the easement that's in place out there, the drainage easement. And if we feel it to be a little more cautious, we may have a general statement about retaining any other easements that may be found to exist on the property, but clearly getting rid of our title to the extent we have any, so that it's one contiguous parcel, and he doesn't have the problem he has today with the landlocked issue.
I guess I got two questions. Who mows the grass?
Mr. McAdoo, who's the owner since 1986.
Is that 732?
Yes.
And I think that back
It's
part
his.
is heavily wooded.
What we would hope to do here is just resolve a conflict between the land records and the tax records, and quit claim any interest that the city may have in it, so that 20 years from now or 40 years from now or next week, when somebody else tries to figure this out, we've got a record in the property side that says the city doesn't have an interest in it.
Where the word partial appears on here, is that part, is that a lot of record, or is that part of 732's lot?
By survey, it's a part of 732's lot, and also by the deed that they purchased in 1986, it's a part. And so the survey that Matthew has on the screen right now represents the property that the owner thinks he purchased in 1986.
So his property is the access point to that lot as well?
Yes, or that area of his lot. Since we believe, I think this is really an orphaned parcel. Not sure why it wound up there, but we have a tax card on it. There's been action by the tax assessor's office for who knows how long.
How far back can we go on property taxes if we give it to him?
1986 maybe. And he's paying 4 tax bills right now, 2 in the city and 2 in the county, for the 2 separate tax parcels that the county assessor bills him for.
Because that 40 by 40 block separates his parcel into 2 parcels, the tax records are showing it as 2 different parcels, and he gets 2 different tax bills. 4 really, 2 from the city, 2 from the county. But again, because the county's tax records show our little tax exempt block, it makes him have 2 lots instead of 1.
So is the back lot in the county?
No.
No. Well, he pays county taxes on everything, plus city taxes because he's in the city.
So both lots are paying city taxes?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the back parcel, he said, was last year's tax bill was $6. So it cost the county and the city more than $6 to issue the tax bill to collect $6 on. So
this will unify that property.
It cleans up a lot of
it
cleans up a lot of things. Mr. Ives and I are hesitant to advise the mayor and council to quit claim our interest in it until we're confident that we don't have any. So we've polled some other staff members. We're relying on the information provided by the title company, the Register of Deeds office, and the surveyor to help formulate an opinion. Still got some work to do on that, but knowing that the closing is scheduled for Friday, and we had an opportunity to bring it before you today, we wanted to avail ourselves to
one last question. And this one I'm serious about. Who maintains the easement? I mean, if it's a drainage ditch, I'm assuming it runs through several properties there, that easement does.
Right, so there's 2 answers to that question. The property owners maintain the vegetation and the land. We maintain the drainage function. So if the pipe breaks or the ditch gets clogged or needs work, we take care of the drainage function of it, but the owners themselves actually mow the grass and trim the trees and pay the taxes.
On many of those ditches, though, they get overgrown, and we wind up with really almost an area that we maintain on people's private property, and
We're trying to, you understand, we're trying to stay out of that business and get out of it where we're in it now. What we have found is when the easements are maintainable, the owners are more than happy to do that. And it helps them and it helps us. And then if we do have a major problem out there, such as a pipe clog or collapse, we still have the ability to come in and deal with the drainage function.
There is an identical trapezoidal feature on the back of the lot that's immediately above this lot that we saw on the plat, and both of those are completely covered with a drainage easement. And the people have told us that they've just the neighborhood people have used that as a park. It's open back there, and it is heavily wooded, so I doubt that there's very much maintenance at all. It appears from the overheads anyway to be very heavily wooded, so you wouldn't expect a lot of maintenance back there.
All right, any other discussion?
Move for approval.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It passes. Any other business? We are adjourned.